Uh, I'm just going to provide a few opening remarks about our most recent publication, The Powerless Brokers, and then we'll invite folks to unmute themselves and ask any questions. And I'm here and available for as long as people would like. And we'll put in the chat a link to the report if you haven't seen it. But the Powerless Brokers, a report we just published today, and the subject matter is about pre-construction transit permitting. And as folks may be aware, that in California, building transit is very slow and expensive. And in order to get the transit that we need and to meet California's climate and mobility goals, it's really very difficult to get that done. And that's something that Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson wrote about in their latest book, Abundance, that's been making a lot of waves. And this report is in a similar vein. And it's saying that we need to take a hard look at our policies in blue states to make sure that we are not standing in our own way to get the good public goods and services that we need. And we can't have an abundance of public transit with the systems that we have today. So in the public imagination, it's that transit authorities are the ones who decide what to build and how to build it. You know, they get their environmental reviews, they get their funding, their board of elected officials approve their projects, and then they get to build. But actually, that's not how it works. So before transit projects can get built, transit authorities must seek third-party permits from local governments, special districts, state agencies, public and private utilities. And the Powerless Brokers focuses on the many third-party permitting challenges facing transit that are arbitrary, excessive, and avoidable. And this report contains case studies from across California documenting permitting issues that add costs and delays for public transit. The case studies range from the largest project in California, which is the high-speed rail project, to a small busway on the Central Coast. And so for high-speed rail, we've seen time and again that local governments and special districts will hold that project hostage to extract extra money or extra infrastructure in order for permission to build. And that has meant tens of billions of added costs to the overall project and decades of delay. The Trump administration has said that they are going to take away funding because they see no real prospect of getting that project completed. And California needs to prove them wrong. And our report includes a variety of recommendations to help do that. One being to reassign more permitting responsibilities from third parties to transit authorities themselves so that they're able to build. And also to incentivize local governments to prioritize transit, to adopt transparent standards, and to streamline permitting. And there are some rays of hope. There's in our region in San Diego, there's SANDAG, which is our regional transportation agency, and they recently sponsored and built the Mid-Coast Trolley Extension. And that project was a $2 billion project. It extended an existing trolley that went from the San Diego and Mexico border up through downtown San Diego. It extended that from downtown San Diego up to the UC San Diego campus. And that project was done on time and without delay. And there's reasons for that we document in the report. Part of it is that there's a good collaborative effort and between transportation agencies in San Diego, but it's also that SANDAG, the regional transit authority, has special powers under California law that allow them to help smooth the process. And that shows that granting these transit authorities more responsibility can lead to better outcomes. And what our report recommends is that those kinds of responsibilities be extended to other transit agencies, and that we need to empower our transit authorities to build what we say that we want them to build. So with that, I'll pause our prepared remarks, and we'll just invite people to raise their hands, and happy to answer any questions about the report. Don't be shy.
Hi, 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 Colin. Sorry that I could not make this morning's event, and congrats on putting this report out. And I have not yet read it, so this question may likely be answered after I read it. But
Sure.
are there specific policy recommendations that the report is making maybe on like different fronts, like the local level versus the state level, to give these said powers back to transit agencies to do some of the things you're talking about here? Just
Yes, there are. And so in the report, there's the last section is a variety of recommendations that California that they were mostly focused on asking the California legislature and statewide agencies like Caltrans to take action. And with that, and so we have some legislative proposals, for instance, to assign more permitting authority to the transit agencies themselves, so that they don't have to seek third-party permission, but be able to do more of these things themselves. Relatedly, we also have some specific recommendations. For example, creating shot clocks for permits. This is something that you've seen in other contexts for broadband. You've seen this internationally, where in a shot clock is this idea that if a transit agency is seeking a permit, if they apply for a permit from another agency like a city or a county, that city or county should have must make a decision within, say, 60 days. And if they don't make that decision, then the permit is assumed to be granted. And that's the kind of thing that can help reorient the authority toward transit agencies, but also not removing the opportunity for local governments to be engaged. And so those are just a couple of varieties of the recommendations, and there's a few more in there. It's not specifically recommended in the report, but there are some bills in the legislature pending right now. Senate Bill 445 from Senator Weiner is an example, and that would do some of these permitting reforms and apply them not to all transportation authorities, but for the high-speed rail authority particularly.
great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I see we have a question in the chat from Tom. Do you agree the California high-speed rail made the right decision in routing through the Central Valley communities rather than the adjacent to West Valley I-5? I don't. We're not expressing an opinion about that particular question in this report, but what I can certainly say is that the challenges related to third-party permitting. Yeah. So back to the question, California high-speed rail being decided to go through the Central Valley. I think that decision was downstream of the existing permitting challenges for public transit. And if high-speed rail had a clear path to getting the project done, then they would have had opportunities to choose routes that were more likely to have a more immediate ridership. And so if we were to have adopted some of the policies that we have in the Powerless Brokers report, then high-speed rail might have made a different choice. And we should make sure that the policy landscape allows for that. Yeah, Tom's asking another question about should we spend more dollars on Amtrak coast route from Santa Fe to Union Station? Why not start on California high-speed rail route now from San Diego to connect via Riverside? I think eventually we can and should expect high-speed rail to serve California, or serve San Diego. But currently, right now, the route between San Diego and Los Angeles is the second busiest Amtrak route corridor in the entire United States. It's only second to the Acela corridor between DC and Boston. So we really need to prioritize getting that route operational today. It was going to be great when we have a high-speed rail a route running along that same corridor, but we already have a very successful, attractive route that we just need to make sure is up and running and consistent, so the existing riders are able to take advantage of that. Other questions? People are able to unmute themselves, and then you can also put things in the chat.
Hey, Colin, this is Colleen from the LA Times. Do you know when the first permitting requirements went on the books in California?
Oh goodness, I do
Do you
not
have that
know.
off the top of your head?
I do not know. But honestly, I think my guess is that this is a pretty old and ancient practice. When you have public or private agencies doing things in the public right of way, it's ordinary for those local governments to have a role in permitting. Um, but it's also especially been true that a lot of the rules related to permitting and that have gotten in the way of building infrastructure, including public transit, have really expanded since the 70s. And that there's been this multi-decade growth in the kinds of barriers and hoops that applicants and public agencies have to jump through in order to get projects. And so probably permitting in some fashion has existed for quite some time, but the scale of the existing permitting challenges is not exactly new, but most of these laws are things that have really happened from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Adriana has a question. Can you talk a little bit about how funding can exacerbate permitting issues and otherwise delay projects? So there's a couple of things about a couple pieces of that I want to break out. One is that the focus of our report is actually not about the funding challenges for transit. What we're talking about for the most part is that when a transit authority decides they want to build a project, they get funded to build the project, and they're ready to go, then they have to face a whole bunch of permitting challenges and barriers. So these are projects that already had money, enough money to get started. And then they go into the permitting process and may find that they maybe it turns out they don't have enough money because there's a whole bunch of extra permitting requirements that they didn't count on that they couldn't foresee that are added to that. And that's a funding issue, but in a better situation where we had permitting rules that were more sensible and more streamlined, um, then these projects that we're talking about that are impacted there, these are the projects that are funded. There's a couple of other things that we did talk about related to funding in the report, though. One of them is about this is a little wonky, but one of them is about pre-commitment challenges or early commitment challenges, rather. And what that means is that in transportation planning, transit planning, a lot of the grants that are available to transit projects are only available after a project has concluded its environmental review and been approved by its board. And so what oftentimes happens is that public transit agencies rush through that environmental process, rush through that approval process without thinking critically about all of the potential third-party permitting issues that they may have in the future so that they can be eligible to get those grants, assuming that they can rely on some of those grant funding to pay for the mitigations or the studies or the adjustments that will be needed to be made. And so what that means is that, one of the things that we recommend is that we should be creating new funding sources for transit authorities so they can get some of that funding before they conclude their environmental analyses. That way they can more completely analyze their projects, not only to minimize the likelihood they're going to have third-party permitting issues in the back end, but also to make sure that they're adopting and they're studying and adopting the most environmentally friendly alternatives on the front end. And so those are a couple of different ways that funding is related to the permitting issues that we're talking about in the report. Tom also asks that Caltrain seems to be successful, especially its recent electrification, lessons for other urban rail aspirations. Yeah, I think this is a great example in California where we've made some improvements to public transit and it's having some real good dividends, both for riders and for the environment. And as the California is looking to expand its rail network and its transit infrastructure, we should be mindful that there are positive examples in the state. Just like we have the Midcoast in San Diego being a project was relatively on time and within its expected budget. There's some examples like the Caltrain electrification that are also good examples that we should be seeing expanded elsewhere.
Hi, Colin. I'm Madeline Nguyen from Times of San Diego. I saw in the report that sometimes these third-party permits can cause delays, and sometimes those delays might be in bad faith.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit more about that and why a third party might be incentivized to cause a bad faith delay?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we talked about that in a couple of places in the report, specifically around the high-speed rail project. So there's a number of examples that we documented in that case study where when high-speed rail was seeking to get third-party permits from cities and counties in the central part of California, those cities and those local governments were very explicit that they were going to hold up the project in order to extract extra funding or infrastructure spending or other sorts of changes to the project that would benefit their communities. And we have that situation for high-speed rail where the high-speed rail wants to, the agency wants to build the project. They want to deliver that for Californians. And these local governments may not care whether or not the project gets built, or they may even be antagonistic to it. And so they have this, it creates this opportunity for them to do something to hold up the project in order to extract something. And there's something that we also included in that report, some quotes from the Office of Inspector General for the California High-Speed Rail Authority, who pointed out that because of those dynamics, there's really an imbalance in leverage in those negotiations between the rail authority and the local governments, and that can lead to some bad actions. And again, not don't take my word for it. If you look at the report directly, you'll see quotes from city officials, county officials in the Central Valley that are very clear that what they're doing is trying to hold up the project and extract more things for their jurisdiction at the expense of the broader taxpayers in California.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Colin, I have a question.
Yeah, great. And Bill, who are you with?
Uh, on myself, just curious. Yeah, I'm just wondering. So, there's always this, risk of like getting sued, right? But if you're a transit authority, like if you're trying to build a high-speed rail, is there any capability for like the transit authority or say HSR to like reverse sue or like counter sue people with like or institutions with malicious intent?
Yeah, we didn't speak to that question in this report, but one of the things that we did talk about is that one of the main mechanisms by which transit projects get held up yeah, through litigation is through environmental lawsuits, specifically lawsuits related to the California Environmental Quality Act, and that's a policy that requires public agencies who are doing projects like public infrastructure projects historically have had to do a whole bunch of environmental analyses on subjects that include things that are broadly understood to be not environmental concerns, publish those documents and allows for just about anyone to be able to sue on the adequacy of those documents. In recent years, the state legislature has adopted a variety of exceptions to that, and it allows for pro-environmental projects, including a lot of public transit projects, to not have to go through those kinds of environmental analyses because they are by their nature supportive of our climate and environmental goals. And so one of the things that we talked about in the report was that some of those exemptions from those rules ought to be extended so that more projects are able to take advantage of them and don't have to be subject to the same kind of litigation risks that have held up a lot of projects in the past. Other questions? Well, if there are no other questions, I just want to thank everyone for being here and for paying attention to our report, and we encourage all the coverage that we can get. And also, we have information on our press release that I believe you've all seen. That's also on our website about how to get a hold of us. I'll put my cell phone number in the chat right here. We'd be happy to answer additional questions one-on-one as well. I see one more question here from Tom. While outside powerless broker scope, third-party permits from local governments, et cetera, any recommendations on a permanent funding base for California public transit? I think there's ongoing discussions of that in the legislature. I think the recent appropriations for public transit agencies in California to help address the pending fiscal cliff that many of them are facing was the right choice, something that we supported. And we've also supported a variety of local transportation measures in our region. And one thing that the legislature can and should consider is updating the rules around which local governments can raise their own revenues to support public transit. Those are all really important things and matters of statewide consideration. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Again, feel free to reach out. My cell phone's in there. I'd be happy to do additional work. And if you're new to Circulate, keep paying attention to us. We've got some more interesting reports in the pipeline, and we're always trying to be a good ally for our friends in the press. So thanks very much, and have a great rest of your